All right, welcome everybody to another edition of Legal Tech Week. Today is April 14th, 2023. Had to think about what year it is. And this is the show in which we talk about the top stories from legal tech and legal innovation over the past week or whatever else suits our fancy. And I am Bob Ambrogi. I have a blog called Law Sites and a podcast called Law Next. I've got a small group here today. A lot of our regular panelists are off doing other things, but we are fortunate to have Jeff Brandt from Pinhawk sitting in with us today as a guest panel. So, Jeff, let me start with you and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thank you, Bob. I am the editor of the Pinhawk Legal Technology Digest. It's a daily newsletter. It goes to somewhere around 17,000 people at this point. I try and reduce the noise and get the signal ratio up there. You can't read every other article. It seems at this point in my feed is AI related. So I'm trying to take on the duty and responsibility of trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, in terms of the hype and the claims and everything else associated with that. So always a pleasure to join you, Mary Band. So I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
See, every morning I get up and I'm like, was my post yesterday Jeff worthy or not? And it's like, if he features something I wrote about, I'm so happy and it makes my day for the rest of the day. And if not, I'm like, oh, damn, I got to try better tomorrow. So, a couple of our regular panelists are here. Niki, why don't you say hello?
Thanks. I'm excited to have Jeff here, and my name is Niki Black. I'm the head of SME and external education at My Case and LawPay, and I write legal tech columns for Above Law, Daily Record, ABA Journal, and I also oversee some and write some reports out of the My Case and LawPay side of things, one of which I'm going to talk about today. And I'm coming at you from the MCBA Solo Small Firm Conference. I skipped the last session for this, so I'm at the lovely Woodcliff here in Rochester, New York, and Bob has spoken at this conference. Carolyn Elephant spoke at it in the past. Jared Correa's been here, so I'm coming at you from a beautiful little location here. I'm happy to be here.
Jared and I made the Massachusetts contingent trip out there a couple of years ago together. got the tour of Wegmans, which is the highlight of Rochester, New York.
Sadly enough, it's the highlight, but it's cool.
And Joe.
Joe Patrice from Above the Law and Thinking Like a Lawyer, the podcast. I have not been on this show for several weeks and I'm excited to finally be back. Though if you hear banging going on all around me, it's because my house is a war zone at this point, but hopefully it's quiet enough for the show.
Yeah, we missed having you, Joe. It's like, what are we going to talk about without Joe here? It's tough, but we managed to get through it. There's a couple of things to talk about this week, but Jeff, I always like to give our guests the first dibs at talking about something that they were interested in this week. So why don't you kick it off? You're muted.
It would help if I unmuted myself.
Yeah. First rule of being a panelist.
First rule. I've already failed the first rule. I'm in trouble. One of the things that, as I said earlier, my Pinhawk feed is full of AI related, and probably half the feeds are legal specific. The other half are just technology based. So there was a post from Ars Technica talking about why ChatGPT and Bing and everybody else was so good at making up answers, and hallucination is really the term that's been used. And it went very, very interesting post going into basically a different kind of terminology, human psychology, confabulation, in terms of basically filling in the gaps. And that's basically what AI is trying to do. You ask it a question, it doesn't have all the pieces or can't necessarily make the leap from A to D, so it's filling in B and C as part of that. Again, I think it's fascinating. Everybody wants to announce whether they're a vendor, your product now has AI in it, whether you're a big law firm, you're now using AI, and yet we haven't worked out a lot of these issues with hallucinations and everything else. I think it's fascinating to me that learning why things are working the way they're supposed to, and that actually brings up the second one. It was a MIT Technology Review article that talked about the fact that OpenAI has been, put in air quotes, liberal in discussing how the different ChatGPT and GPT models have evolved. And then 4.0 is released, and actually they went kind of radio silent on how 4.0 is different than 3.5, the details and so on. And to me, that's of great concern, because I think exposure, openness, not having AI be a black box is a huge deal. You need AI to, whether it's in the courtroom and you need to be able to explain it to the judge, you need to be able to explain it to the jury, whatever it might be. I'm a little concerned that that is a step in the wrong direction, and I'm assuming a step that is designed to keep competitive advantage, because it just blew off the rails when they opened it up and let people start playing with it. So those are the big things that I saw in the last week or so that to me were most interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting about GPT-4. I didn't actually realize that they were kind of being coy about what the differences were. Because earlier this week, or maybe it was last week, I was working on something and I was looking on the site to get, when it was GPT 3.5, there was a kind of a page that explained how they had kind of trained it and the different models and the differences in the different models. And I went there this week looking for that page and for that information regarding GPT-4, and it's nowhere to be found that I could see. And it does raise some interesting questions, and it of course raises interesting questions for lawyer users. One of the big things we talk about is just the sort of off the shelf, so to speak, GPT getting trained at all against legal data. I mean, like when it took the bar exam, were there bar exam questions somewhere along the line that it was getting trained on, or something like that? And we just don't know that at all. So it's a really interesting question.
Well, like I said, I think it's just the wrong direction, and it concerns me when you consider the tense of verbs being used to describe AI's usage. It is revolutionary, not it's going to be. That it is all the different words we've attached to many things that really don't warrant it. I really do think that AI will be, at some point in time, a major revolutionary tool. Now, you've got a lot of things to resolve yet in terms of whether or not the bar chooses to go in that direction, whether they want to put up a wall and decide that it's unauthorized practice, and again, goes to, it's great, right? I could write stuff. You have to comb through every single line to see that you don't have false sites, that there isn't something made up in between. And, while it's very nice to have something to be able to react to, that's still not the kind of promise and savings that AI is just going to come in and do this stuff left and right. Not going to happen for the midterm, at least.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's going to happen a lot quicker than anything else has ever. I mean, this is going to be an exponential growth, and I was just putting together a slide for a presentation I'm creating for a ChatGPT, and I just decided to use, for purposes of the timeline, to try to show that exponential growth. How long did it take different tools to get to 100 million users, starting with like radio or the telephone? And what was really remarkable to me was it took ChatGPT 2 months to get to 100 million users from its release in November. It took Bing Chat, which granted it's intertwined with a Bing search, but it took it 3 weeks. And comparing that to like Twitter, which is like something like 4 or 5 years, and even TikTok, which was 2 years. And so, I mean, to me, I always tend to be the big picture person. That's why I wrote social media, like with Carolyn in 2010 and cloud computing in 2012. Like I tend to think I'm pretty good at identifying these next big waves, especially once a few people that are up the food chain, like Bill Gates, identify him. I tend to agree with him. And I think he's right that this is it because it's just like email, because it's going to be change the entire way that everything gets done across our culture. It's going to filter into legal a lot quicker than I think anyone thinks it will. I think it's going to be a matter of time before it's ironed out one way or another, that it's streamlining things to an extent, and then it's going to sort of exponentially increase in terms of the rate.
I agree with you. Law is going to be forced into it, which is why it's going to happen faster than ground roots kind of acceptance is going to be forced into it. But I think that in some ways the numbers you're looking at, because I saw a very similar study that talked about the acceptance rates and so on. There's a big difference between it being used in a business sense as opposed to generate pictures of the Pope in a puffy jacket, or Big Bang Theory in rhyming verse. So I think there's a lot of experimentation right now that doesn't necessarily mean that 100 million users are using it as opposed to playing with it. But I think you're right. It will be probably faster than we all want, certainly faster than legal will be willing to accept, but we'll still be forced to work on that.
Well, it also may be that I think in the context of sole and small firm attorneys, it's going to end up being more useful. Because I've used this example. I don't think you're on the panel when I did, but I know someone who works for the PD's office, and one of their colleagues used it for to draft some, give me 20 voir dire questions for this very specific issue in a murder case, and they ended up using 8 of them, and they got a not guilty, and picking a jury is half of getting a not guilty, right? And so it's the idea that can help you bounce ideas off and generate, it's like having this highly intelligent but sort of lying asshole next to you who you can constantly bounce ideas off of, but you never quite know when they're going to just totally lie to your face and look at you all wide-eyed and make it sound wonderful. So
the term that's going around is mansplaining as a service, which is kind of what it does. It's going to be very, very confident that it's right, whether it is or not. Which, when we talked about Casetext's co-counsel, that was the thing that I got into while talking to Pablo about it. Was he was like, look, when you ask this question, it gives you this answer, we don't know. It knows. It would try to give you an answer, but we're not confident in the answer it's going to give. So we've built it to say, I don't know there. But left to its own devices, it's going to try to explain it and potentially get it wrong. And that's why I've kind of thought that this tool, which I don't think is ready for the prime time of the hype that people have about it, the nature of getting there is not going to be about the algorithm itself getting better as much as it's going to be about people figuring out how to put guardrails on it in the most effective and professional and expeditious manner to deal with it before it does get smart enough that, you can trust it.
Yeah, I wrote this week about that Joseph Q that came out. I think probably others of us wrote about that too. But similarly, it's got that kind of a guardrail where it basically just says, if it's not able to answer the question, then it tells you, I'm sorry, that's, not something I can give you the answer to. And that's very useful that it can do that.
Very useful.
Yeah.
And since we might have a teeny bit of time, I just wanted to tell about a funny thing that I read about it. There's a thing called Auto GPT that's out that all the, I guess, crypto bros are talking about. But it's like someone took ChatGPT and ran it through Python and turned it into like an AI that can just do its own thing. Meaning like you give it a task and you don't even have to keep saying, now do this, now do that. You just tell it what to do and it does it. And it can go out into the internet to do it. And so one person tried to create like chaos, GPT, so that it was supposed to go out and kill the world, and told it to go out and like kill all of humanity. But what was really funny to me was, so it was like, first it came up with, all right, I'm going to create a Twitter account to stir things up. And then I'm going to go and use some other chat GPTs because it created a list of what I was going to do. I'm going to go get some other GPT bots to help me. And so it created a Twitter account that started to say like humanity sucks and I'm going to kill you all. So it successfully did that. But then when it reached out to another ChatGPT bot and it said, "Now I want you to help me find the most horrible chemicals to kill people," and it said, "I'm a nice bot. I don't do that." So talking about like guardrails, it got stuck because the GPT 3.5 had these guardrails in it and it wouldn't help this chaos bot do what it needed to do. So it got stuck with just this malicious, mean Twitter account. And that was about as far as it got when it got set out into the world because the other bots got in the way. But it's really interesting. And if you look it up, it's called Auto GPT. And it's this new tool that I think you're going to start hearing more and more about in the GPT world.
It's interesting because that
yeah.
the guardrails piece is kind of like Tesla and driving, right? I'm not sure that we'll ever see fully automated driving until we have smart roads as part of that, the two working together. So is there a piece for AI or specifically legal AI that would be that smart road that would then push us through the confidence levels and the other pieces and parts that would get us into full adoption or close thereby?
Well, insofar as we're talking about guardrails and hallucinations and GPT, I wonder if we should talk about whether there should be guardrails around vendors' claims of what they can do with GPT. I wanted to talk about something I wrote about this week, and I actually meant to write a follow up, and I just haven't had time this week because I've been so swamped with other stuff. And I hate to sort of single out this vendor because it's not their fault, but there was news this week from Ironclad about their new AI assist that they'd announced it earlier and took it out of beta this week. It's a really cool tool that basically uses GPT-4 to automate the redlining of draft contracts. But the press release said, quote, "This is the first generative AI powered digital contracting tool to be released publicly to the market." And when I read that, I had to stop and think, well, wait a minute, is this the first generative AI powered? And then I thought, well, no. I mean, you can even just talk about Casetext Co-Counsel, which does some digital contracting functions, and I think they even had an event at Legal Week where they kind of talked about some of that. And so I actually kind of rewrote it a little bit I reworded it in my post about it to say it was the first. I forgot how I said it. The first. I thought I had it here. The first contract redlining application powered by the latest version of OpenAI. Well, so of OpenAI's generative AI. So that was a mistake that I put that, because then immediately I heard from 9 million vendors who said they all had some kind of GPT powered redlining thing going on. I like within moments of publishing that post, I got a call from one vendor saying, "Wait, that's not true. We do it." And then I got another vendor that sort of demanded that I issue a retraction or a correction, which I may do in a way when I get around to writing about this. But it points to, I think, a couple of things. I mean, there were so many vendors coming out with GPT related products, and there were so many claims around those products. And maybe the safest thing to do is just not report half the stuff they're claiming about them. But if something really is the first to do something, then I want to cover that and report that. But it gets really hard to decipher what's real and what's not in terms of how companies are using, and even whether they're using GPT-4 or GPT, or ChatGPT, or what are they even using. There's this whole thing about, we're partnering with OpenAI. Well, what does that mean? If you really try and drill down to what does it mean that they're partnering with OpenAI, some people just mean they're using the API that OpenAI has. Other people seem to have some more formal relationship where they're actually working with OpenAI's developers in refining their product or whatever. So I think in terms of hallucinations and guardrails, I mean, we as reporters, I guess, are supposed to be the guardrails around this, but it can be really hard to sort through the fact versus fiction in terms of what vendors are saying here.
A lot of it. Those would be very thick and very tall guardrails for the vendors.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess maybe I need to start by reading some of the books that people have been talking about in the chat here to help me better understand all this.
I feel like sometimes those sorts of errors happen because vendors themselves don't know what other vendors are doing. They live in their own little silo, because I definitely have had meetings with vendors, and I don't remember who it was, and I won't name them even if I did, but I don't remember exactly, but I've had meetings where people say, and we just developed the first thing that does this, and I'm like, I definitely talked to like 4 other people who have done that for about a year. And so
Yeah, that's definitely. I mean, that's been a problem, I think, for a long time with vendors. I mean, for as long as I've been writing my blog, you'll get vendors coming out with these press releases saying we are the first to do something, and had they taken 10 minutes to even read my blog, let alone go on Google, they would have realized that they're not the first to be doing it.
but they asked ChatGPT, has anyone else ever done this? And it said, no,
It just wants to please. It just wants to please. You're the first and you're the best.
Mirror, mirror on the wall.
Yeah. Well, before we get before we leave the topic of AI and GPT, Joe, maybe we ought to turn to your stories this week, and then we can go back to the real world and talk about Niki's stuff.
yeah. So this was a story that also I originally saw in Ars Technica. The first real defamation claim against the generative AI. It's not they didn't file it, but apparently the system went on a search and tried to find some reason why, was asked about some public official in Australia, and it spit out that he'd gone to prison for this bribery scheme, which it wasn't made up out of whole cloth necessarily. What was wrong was that he was the whistleblower in a case that ultimately sent some people to jail for bribery, and it was getting tripped up on that. But you could see how somebody who's an elected official in a country would have a problem with something going around and telling people that they've been in prison for bribery. So they've asked, OpenAI to fix this problem, or they may be sued. Seems as though they have, because trying to ask questions about this guy get better answers now. So maybe it's been handled, but it is a sense of where things might go. Because what if you get in a situation where it trips up on details like that, where, it's an understandable screw up, but it's one that, mansplaining as a service can lead to trouble. I
you wrote about the Turley thing, right?
Well, I was going to say, let me contrast this with Jonathan Turley's nonsense, because he is all up in arms about it, because Eugene Volokh apparently is sitting around typing tons of queries into ChatGPT just to find one that it will be defamatory, which I think trolling for defamation is not exactly a good faith effort. But apparently he's been asking all these questions, trying to find some mistakes, and ultimately it told Volokh that Turley had some sexual harassment case against him on a class trip to Alaska, which, okay, should be red flags that no one would believe, but whatever. Because A, why would a George Washington professor go take a class trip to Alaska for anything? And B, why would Jonathan Turley interact with students when he could just be writing things trying to get on TV, which is seemingly the only thing he does? So I don't think it was really believable. I don't think his reputation was in any way harmed. So I don't think this counts. But I think that's a good contrast between somebody who just asks for a biography of someone and it misinterprets real data and, trying in bad faith. One of the things Volokh was doing was he didn't go into this, but in his explanation of it, but reading between the lines, the prompts he's writing are there sexual harassment cases about professors? He's like, sexual harassment cases about professors, please provide 5 examples. And I'm like, Why'd you do that? Is it because you already tried one and it came up with the right answer? So now you're asking for two, and then that didn't hallucinate. So now you're asking for three. It seems like he was really trying to do whatever he could to prompt engineer something he could report as a mistake.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting. When I first saw that, it was Mayor Hood, I think it was, in Australia. So if you had ChatGPT or the OpenAI folks program a bubble around Mayor Hood, first thing that immediately comes to mind is, isn't that what caused HAL 9000 to go insane?
Right.
So you look at these kinds of, what do you want to call them, butterfly effects, downstreaming effects, and so on. Are we going to be, America's a fairly litigious country. Are we now going to have any kind of AI or language learning module now have these set of instructions? And now, as I think about it, isn't that also, didn't they do that to RoboCop in one of the lesser interesting movies? They gave him, he went from one or two directives to thousands and couldn't act. Are we going to shoot ourselves in the virtual AI foot trying to handle all those? It'd be interesting.
We don't want GPT going insane on us.
Yeah. Not if it's connected to anything. And if you're virtual, fine is fine. When you start giving it access to other things, then now you're talking Skynet and everything else. So.
Right.
Well, I think it's a very real possibility. I don't think that those are like even, I've watched way too much science fiction. I think it's all too feasible and terrifying. So I don't think it's I don't know, the possibilities of once it does like get out there on the internet, and there's so many bad actors. There's so many ways to use it in bad ways effectively already that it's really alarming. So we'll see. It's been nice knowing you is kind of what I'm saying. So
It's all a simulation anyway, so does it really matter?
exactly. I'm
Well,
glad
insight
you're
to that.
finally like buying into my life philosophy.
Oh, I'm starting more and more to believe that. I don't know. That's the only way
Well,
to
there-
explain
I like
certain
the-
things.
Right? Like every week there's headlines like the Dalai Lama, that thing that he said to the young kid in front of 1,000 people on camera, suck my tongue. Like, what is happening here? Like, what is going on? This has got to be a simulation. There's too many crazy things going on.
Yeah. All right. All right. Well, in a break from established tradition here, we actually have Niki actually has something to talk about that doesn't involve GPT. So that'll be refreshing.
Well, and all this, all my introductions alluding to all these reports I oversee, I actually have evidence that I did oversee and write one. We one of the things that I do is I oversee a 3-part series where we pull benchmark data from my case in LawPay and write a short report about it each quarter, and productivity, financials, and then like how lawyers get work done, how lawyers get paid, and how lawyers get clients. And so the productivity one was just released, and Joe wrote about it, and so did Steve Lerner at Law 360. And so of course
Which
I'll
is
link to
Niki's way
Joe's
of making
article.
me feel bad because I haven't gotten around to writing about it yet.
Well, we're going to talk about it, so it's all good. So let's see. Well, so this is Joe's, and so basically what I focused on was I pulled some productivity data from my case, and I tried to focus on this year sort of some KPIs. My goal is to partly provide lawyers with data that can help them make decisions about how to run their practices and how to get work done in their practices. And so so some of the things that I thought were particularly interesting in terms of data from this report, and I'll put a link to the report in a minute, was we have a feature called Smart Time Finder. And it's a great example of how efficiency, tech tools that increase efficiency can really affect your bottom line. And so Smart Time Finder is passive time tracking that's built into my case. And so at the end of the day, lawyers can pull up the Smart Time Finder page and find all the work that they've done within my case that they haven't yet billed for. And so they can easily capture it and invoice it out. And so what the data showed was that in 2022, if you assume a $350 per hour billing rate, our customers who use Smart Time Finder captured additional billable time in 2022 worth $202 million and change. And so that's a significant amount of money that's captured using this tool. So it, more than pays for the software itself. So that was a cool thing. And it's just a way to show that we've all been stuck at the end of the day with an empty timesheet. And it just goes to show how not only are you tracking time as you go, but you're able to capture this time that you missed. And then another thing that was, I think was interesting and that was new that I did this year was the work in progress rates for different practice areas. And so essentially what that lets you know is get a sense of how efficient your firm is and also how your firm's caseload compares to people with other practice areas, other firms with the same practice areas. So it just we provided information about the average number of open cases per firm in 2022 for all the different practice areas that we focused on, the average number of closed cases per firm for that same time frame, and then the work in progress rate, which is just the open divided by closed. And so they had on, it just showed how many cases they were working on at any given time for the different practice areas. So like immigration was 10.3, bankruptcy 10.9, and then like traffic was 5.2, civil was 6.6, and sometimes the data can be a little bit challenging to pull and then make sense of because not a lot of people are just traffic firms, right? So they have other practice areas and it affects and then the length of the cases are going to affect how many are open at a given time and the complexity. But it's an interesting benchmark that helps lawyers make business decisions about their practices. So I was really interested to pull the data and try to make sense of it and use some of our data analysts to help me do the math that I went to law school to avoid. So, but so that this was there's some interesting data in there that's worth checking out. And Joe's articles are always very entertaining, so you can read his post. So, and I'll go track that link down to the report so you can download it if you're interested.
Yeah, I think what's part of what makes these reports interesting, and probably have to give a shout out to Cleo's as well, because what you're able to do, because you have so many lawyers working on your platform, is to get actual data about stuff that we used to kind of take lawyers' word for. We in older surveys, you may ask lawyers about some of these KPIs or other factors, and I suspect they didn't always answer or report them all that accurately. But now with these cases running through my case, running through Clio, running through other practice management systems, you can really see the numbers and get a much better picture of how well lawyers are making use of their time, how effective they are in billing and other things in case management, and it's not always a very pretty picture that comes out of it.
And it is hard to make sense of it. Like this one also included my blank on what it was. 1 second. Data that showed like efficiency in terms utilization rates. And the challenge with that is that you really need to isolate it to solo practitioners only, because the utilization rates for like different law firms are going to vary because the bigger the firm is, the more practice areas and so and utilization rates rely on tracked hours. So we really only wanted the lawyers who billed a lot of hours, not the ones that did contingency fee or flat fee billing. And so we had to look at just solos that billed a lot of hours over a certain amount for the data to be even remotely useful. And so it was interesting because for solo law firm customers that recorded at least 5,000 time entries in 2022, it was they had a 6.1 hours of actual billed time per workday. But when you looked at solo lawyers who recorded at least 1,000 time entries, it was 3.1 hours. And so and I know that like one of Clio's data points was always used was like solo lawyers only billed like 2.1 hours. Like our data showed something different, but it was when you really dug down and only focused on the firms that were actually billing out those hours, because some criminal defense attorneys are using assigned counsel, most are using flat fee. Some civil litigation attorneys will track their time but they're billing contingency, and they're only doing that in case they can get lawyers' fees or something, but they don't actually bill the time out. So that's why we wanted to focus only on solos and only the ones that actually had time entries that got invoiced, and to try to get data that was hopefully slightly more accurate in terms of, the utilization rate and how much work they're actually getting done each day. So,
Yeah.
but it's
One of,
tough.
actually,
to
one
try
of the
to
other
make sense of
interesting,
it.
I thought one of the other interesting things out of it, I mean, I don't know what exactly what it tells you, but with the court date reminders data, where it tells how many court date reminders the number of court date reminders sent to clients by practice area. At first, when I read that, I was thinking it meant court date reminders that are coming for the lawyers, reminding them of their own court dates. But then I realized it was going out to clients. And I mean, some of these are, it's really interesting to see. I mean, criminal law, well, I guess average number isn't all that high, two per case, but some of these, 19,000 reminders in criminal law cases. What was the high? I guess the highest was personal injury, although not a huge number overall, but per case 3.2. But it gives you a picture of, how many of these cases are in court and needing their clients to be in court. I thought that was interesting.
Well, and that's also like, these reports serve a bunch of different purposes, right? And court date reminders are a cool feature that we have that shows how, if you automate the reminders, you don't have to actually, the system will do it for you, and you don't have to send it out yourself. And it just sort of shows this time that was saved by these lawyers because they had these automated reminders sent out that their admins, or that they didn't have to bother with. And also it is interesting just to see the different practice areas, how it varied. I mean, that's what I think is so interesting when you break it down by practice area, how some of this stuff is so different.
Yeah. That's all we had. That's all we had to talk about. Anything else we want to talk about? I probably should at least mention the investment in iManage this week. Kind of notable news. They took a strategic growth investment from Bain Capital Tech Opportunities, which is actually the second. I don't know how the Bain entities work, but it's actually the second major legal tech investment from Bain in a couple
I
of weeks, because
noticed
they were
that too.
involved in that VLEX fast case one as well. So I don't know what's going on there, but iManage is continuing to work on its cloud platform, and I think that's where the money's going to be going here, is to continue that push. I think they've got some strong competition going on with NetDocuments right now, and it's be interesting to see where that goes.
The one other story that I thought worth flagging, I wrote something up, but it was originally a Wired story, I kind of viewed it as the mirror image of the do not pay pile-on that people have been doing, because say what we will about whether or not do not pay overreached. Totally. That said, at least it was trying to help people. What the Wired article is about is that these debt collection firms are now utilizing these AI tools to pepper the dockets with requests for cases that they would otherwise never go after, because it's not even worth the time and effort. But given that our debt collection world is so bad, with people often never even being served with stuff before a judge orders their wages garnished, with judges not even bothering to read filings in some of these instances, just seeing, oh, you say this person owes whatever, okay, fine, so ordered. And so these bots now allowing these agencies to file tens of thousands of lawsuits they otherwise wouldn't, and who cares whether they're bad? They can probably get some money off of people, even if they're wrong in some instances. The person had actually paid it and they have bad records, is really kind of frightening. And and I thought it was a mirror of the do not pay, in that do not pay, one of the knocks was, Catherine Tewson tried to make it write a complaint and it wrote a bad one. And yeah, if you're trying to defend yourself and write a bad defense, that's a problem. But if you write a bad debt collection complaint, unfortunately, that tends to work out well for people. Well, for the companies.
Yeah, that's a real problem. Somebody in the chat
Yeah.
mentions solo suit, which is solo suits. Like basically, sole purpose is to help people just respond. I mean, they don't do anything much more beyond that. But one of the big problems that they identified was that so many people that are served with debt collection lawsuits have no idea what to do about it and just don't
Yeah.
do anything, and therefore the creditors get a default judgment against them. And solo suit was an attempt to try and address that by at least making it easier for people to be able to respond to a lawsuit and get into court. And I mean, so many of the debt collection lawsuits really are, they were junk. A lot of them were junk before they were using AI to junk them up even more. So that's a troubling development.
I mean, if you're looking at the human side expense and it's not worth going after anything under $100, and then you automate that so that it's worth going after anything that's $10. That's a quantum leap in annoyance at the minimum.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where ChatGPT can, these tools can do that quickly for him. Someone at this conference was just talking to me about, he just read an article, maybe it was the same one you talked about, but that where they have calculations where they've determined approximately what monetary level people will just pay. He was talking more about copyright trolls. Same concept though, like at what level will people just pay instead of getting a lawyer? And it's the same with debt collection. I think that they sort of know exactly what that tipping point is where they're actually going to try to figure it out or just pay it or just ignore it. Like they know how to do this and do it quickly.
Yeah.
And efficiently.
Well, I think Dennis's words can like walk us out of the show this week. We kind of live in hellish times when you think about it. Yeah, I guess we kind of do when you think about it. But that's why it's all a simulation, right? All right, I think we can wrap up early here because we don't have much more to talk about, and let everybody have their weekend get going a little bit earlier. And we'll be back again next Friday to talk about whatever happens in the world of legal tech and innovation between now and then. You won't be. You're nodding your head. You're shaking. Yeah. All right. Some of us will be back next Friday. All right. Thanks everybody for coming. See you all. Jeff, thanks for sitting in. See you all next week.
My pleasure.
Bye all.
Have a good weekend, everyone.